Well, I'm going to get started while Casey signs his first book of the night. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Love Books. It's wonderful, as always, to have you all here tonight. And we are, of course, launching Casey's new book, God's Waiting Room, Racial Reckoning at Life's End. And what a surprise this book is. It's published by Wits Press, which, as you know, is an academic press. And thank you to them for publishing this book and for bringing it our way. And strictly speaking, it is a work of academia, I suppose, but it is so beautifully and so creatively written, I would hesitate to think of it as an academic book. It reads like a novel, it's touching, it's poignant, and these are things that academic books are not. Casey, I don't know if you're planning to read an extract, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think it would be really lovely if you do read a little bit for us. So congratulations, Casey. It's wonderful to have you here tonight. Just a little bit about Casey. He's a creative writer and a cultural and medical anthropologist whose research explores life, death, and their thresholds, asking how people work through and memorialize critical events in their lives and communities. He's the author of many journal articles and another book called Funeral Culture, AIDS, Work, and Cultural Change in an African Kingdom. He is chair, and this is breaking news, I believe, full professor of anthropology and women's... Congratulations. And women's and gender studies at the University of New Hampshire in the United States. Chatting to Casey this evening, it's really lovely to have Jarred Thompson here tonight. Jarred is a novelist, a literary and cultural studies researcher, and a lecturer in the English department at the University of Pretoria. His debut novel, which also deals with mortality, The Institute of Creative Dying, did fantastically well. It was shortlisted for the Sunday Times Literary Award last year, and it won the prestigious UJ Debut Prize last year. So fantastic to have all these accomplished people here tonight. Jarred, thank you so much, and I'm going to hand over to the two of you.
Thanks so much, Kate. Welcome, everybody. I think it's an opportune time to ask Casey to read. I was thinking about kind of why set the stage by having you read first, and I was drawn to one of your first chapters where you actually write about going on the journey to grace, and I thought that having you read would at least give us some coordinates, give us some snacks for the road ahead, and you can explain that reference. But yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Generous introduction, and thank you all for your smiling faces and attentions on a kind of rainy day. But it's much better than the winter we're exiting in Boston at the moment. So thank you for that. Like Jarred kind of describes, this book took me, and I write about it as if I'm taking you, the readers, on a road trip through, as the Cape Talk DJ I had an interview with last month said, the dusty roads of Mpumalanga, when I did the radio interview spot to describe the book for him. And finding a place on Google Maps, some place that might be out of the way if it wasn't otherwise noted, was an old age home. We enter the waiting room and we meet the manager, and from there we go on a room-by-room tour to meet 3 staff members and 3 residents, and we'll see if we make it out alive by the end of the book. Surely that's how it ends, so now you have to buy and see if you do make it out alive. Something about the security cameras everywhere around here makes me bring my bag with me, just to be safe. From the office to the dining room, which abuts the voorkamer, we move onto a long, long hallway, mesmerizingly long, or else the lighting at the end gives that impression. Angel, the manager, strokes the faces of those we pass. Hello, hello, in a sweet childish voice, to which the wrinkled faces coo, Goeiemorgen. You see, we're just a big happy family in here. No complaints, says one man we pass. Eugene, this is Casey. A man whose dark hair shines unusually deep due to a deep slant in his parietal bone on his skull, holds a blank piece of paper the size of a Post-it. Angel withdraws a pink pen from her breast pocket, and against the wall she writes, My name is Eugene. I am 60. I live in Grace, room 2, Chief Macabre Street. Today's date is, what's the date? I can't remember, actually. We give him one of these every day, and he's been here 6 years since the motorcycle accident. Used to be a vegetable, but today, sociable. The memory's just not so good, and down to a whisper. His roommate, Lo, used to laugh at him, says his wife's gone screwing somebody now that he's gone. What an ass. No date needed, I guess. Here you go, Jean. 3 fingers receive the info. The other 2 are missing. He looks it over. Didn't know that. No complaints. And then arriving at the nurse's station, we meet her, Nolene. Here she is, Sister Zyman. You're too young to be a doctor. The sister laughs. Not that kind, sorry. The towering woman with red hair, gold-framed glasses, and a military-like white uniform gives me a hug. She's our head nurse. We're so lucky. And did you know she was Nelson Mandela's prison nurse? The first sister of rank to work on Robben Island, she adds. I'm stunned. You'll be in good hands here and learn a lot, Angel says, patting her hand on the desk. Nolene is now by our side, along with a crew of 8 black women and 1 man, looking ready but less than bright-eyed for the 7 a.m. morning shift to start. Just be free to talk to the people. They will love you. And please write the book about how we are the best old age home in this country. I hope. I have so much to do today, that funeral, the diversity training, etc., but you'll find me around. Every day there's something new in God's waiting room. Oh, wait, I say, before you go, what advice might you have to somebody who finds themselves in this place, that they must come to grace? What matters in the end? Angel smiling earnestly and looking straight into my soul. When you age, there's always pain, but in death, you no longer feel that. Life carries on. Oh, she startles. The rest have gone tidying, except for 1 woman who appears beside us, LaRue. Angel. Anne, good morning. And to me, she speaks English only. Up early, my love? She plants a kiss on the cardigan woman's forehead. This is Casey. He's a doctor. Not that kind, sorry. Anne blinks, and we wait. She usually wants some sweets or something. She blinks. We wait. And he's here to hear people's stories, to learn who we are and where we've been. She blinks. We wait. Anything, LaRue? Anything? She blinks and testifies in a single sentence. I'm not afraid.
Thank you.
I'm actually holding up, if you're saying, what is he reading? This is the US edition, so different cover over on, maybe evokes a different kind of sensibility to what you see on the purple cover, or maybe something of the same. Yeah, we played around with having a woman patient, something zoomed in all to the back, an all black cover that looked like they were walking into the void a little bit too much, but emergency department red sounds like maybe a good fit, so yeah.
Why the purple?
I'm not sure. Karina designed it and it looked wonderful. So
yeah. No, I mean, we could tell, like, just from your reading how, I know, you managed to weave, like, anecdotal kind of observations with really vivid, like, characterizations of the different people you encounter, peppered with, you know, some historical explanation of certain concepts or certain references that people make, and you describe the form as like literary ethnography, and like as a literary scholar, I was interested in that phrase and what the literary offered you in the writing that maybe wouldn't have been possible if it was just like an ethnography or just like an academic book. Yeah.
It's a great question, and my first book was much more in the academic vein. Oh, hello. Kind of very an explanation of the book Funeral Culture that was mentioned, a book of how HIV/AIDS had impacted the insurance and funeral industry in Eswatini, then Swaziland, and theorizing what that meant. So typically in ethnography, we'll have a lot of facts, a lot of maybe juicy quotes from the people that we meet, these extraordinary stories, and then comes a big fat paragraph that will tell you, what did I just read? And so when I had encounters with people like Anne, who blinks and blinks and blinks and then just says, I'm not afraid. Or when I had encounters with Andrew, one of the featured residents of the chapter, who tells me, nobody knows about me here that I'm a gay man and have gone back into the closet. Or Bethel, the one black male nurse that was employed at the home, who tells me I was born with XX chromosomes and I developed breasts as a young man. When people tell me those stories, I don't then want to tell you what that means. I think the literary part of literary ethnography allows us to describe the people and situations that we're in, and that is the definition of ethnography, writing about people, right? And theory can be helpful to explain why people do what they do, but sometimes these very immense human situations that we behold can linger and stand, and you can find your own meaning in that, respective of where you came from in your life journey. So I think getting rid of some of the theory and allowing the stories to shine through, and using literary devices like poetic form, maybe a screenplay-like quality where you just are listening to people talk back and forth at each other. Those are some of the techniques that I found very rewarding.
Because it comes out, this is one chapter, jokes, where the caregivers are joking with the people at the home, the elderly at the home. And you write about jokes. There's a dynamism in the scene where the way they're joking, in another context, it may come off as kind of, oh, there's a little bit, it's a touchy topic, it's a taboo topic. But in the intimacy that the home produces, you kind of put up the question, might jokes be a different kind of bridge to something else? And I don't know if you could speak a bit to that.
Yeah. Once you explain a joke, it's not quite funny anymore. And so again, literary ethnography, I don't need to tell you why this is funny. Some of the things, it must be context dependent. And so I think American readers might not get all the nuances of South Africans joking with each other. And let me tell you, guys have very good jokes on what is formerly Twitter, right? The joking discourse is great in public media. Joking really in this home revolved around the fact that people spoke multiple languages, but they often didn't speak them very well to each other. And because they didn't speak them well, others did not understand what was being said. And maybe others didn't understand what was being said because they were also living with cognitive decline related to dementia, or the hearing battery just hasn't been replaced in, a couple months. These miscommunications were kind of the content of joking that I think perhaps reflected a bigger story of racial relations, of generational differences. This was a home where the majority of staff are young Black women, born free generation and some not. And the residents are majority older white women. Women just tend to live longer than men, are in there because of their husbands' pensions. There were also, at any given time, 4 to 5 older Black adults in this home too. And it made for an interesting crew, a little motley crew, I guess we sometimes say. People who have inherited the categories that have been put on them by the history of South Africa and the social forces that they've lived with. And joking helped to maybe ease the tension. It's a classic kind of theory of what jokes do. They just get that pressure valve released a little bit here and there. But even if they perhaps are so different as society says they should be, I think they also found a mutual ground in that they are in a place that is quite out of the way or made to be erased. At least in the United States of America, studies with older adults in long-term care are said to face higher rates of depression, social isolation, and there are many more such homes in America, as we call them, nursing homes versus old age homes. And most people don't wish to be in a place like this in late life. And on the flip side, I don't think many of the staff that I met and worked with and interviewed wish to be there either. Pay was not very good, piecemeal integration into like the union sector, facing people who are depressed, socially isolated, and maybe because of dementia-related decline, or I shouldn't say decline, just changes associated with dementia, who were perhaps ungrateful or were aggressive, agitated, refused care, saying, "Get away from me, don't touch me," and saying a lot worse to these people. People who neither of them really want to be here, but yet must be there every day for the paycheck or to be cared for. And I think being in such an out-of-the-way place and marginalized across different axes puts people on a kind of plane together on which they can try to reach for something like maybe friendship or something like a family, as Angel said. But joking doesn't quite make everything so rosy. And so, people have to get by in other ways as well.
Because you mentioned, and maybe something that we don't really talk about, the double-sidedness of elder abuse, how, yes, old people can be vulnerable, and there was a scene where there was regulations around the handling of old people's SASA cards and things like that, and like making sure that that's protected. But that elder abuse can happen the other way, where we have like the older white man or woman calling the caregivers, derogatory names, and how do they kind of navigate that, knowing that like you grapple a lot with whether an old person can change, given the fact that, first of all, they're frail, but also that they may not be in the right mental space. They may be suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's, so they may be in this kind of time loop where they can't see, their caregiver as something more than the kind of white supremacist institutions that they grew up in and that they think is the everyday. And yeah, I just found that interesting. Like, where do we draw the line in terms of, oh, this person can't change, we just have to give them the grace. I have to kind of embody this grace somehow, or no, I should be a bit more tough, give some tough love and try and draw a line. Yeah, that was interesting, I found.
Yeah, it's actually kind of an anthropological question that if you asked a healthcare worker in England versus Dubai versus South Africa versus Japan, if a patient or a resident says a derogatory thing to you, why are they saying that? And you would probably get a different answer depending on where you are, cross-culturally or cross-nationally. Maybe I'll read a little bit so you can hear what some of the caregivers said when I asked this to them. So this is the chapter of Bethel. So this is the, who doesn't identify as trans or intersex, but I think that was one subject or positionality we could attribute to him. I think of some films that I've seen featuring Alzheimer's, and they are actually all about white people. The Notebook, The Savages, Iron Lady, Still Alice. Samuel L. Jackson recently starred in a limited streaming series as a man living with dementia, The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray, but there are fewer depictions of its effects on black families and relationships, let alone how racism shapes caregiving, whether one gives up on this job or not. Do you think old people are more racist in general? Bethel. They are, he admits, and I assume he means older white people. But I don't blame them. That is just how they grew up in that time. But they can't get away with saying these things, can they? Shouldn't they be punished or something? Is how I suddenly end up phrasing it. How can you punish an old person, Casey? You can't do that. Well, do you think being old is just an excuse for bad behavior? I mean, can't people change even if they're older? Mildly exasperated. I don't think so. I mean, they can change if they want, but most don't. They're not going to. Precious told me another caregiver recently quit because of it. The constant barrage of outright and indirect comments from certain residents. The caregiver wasn't unforgiving per se. She just didn't need to hear it anymore. And maybe you don't need to hear any of this. Maybe you've made up your mind already about, quote, old racists. Here's another one from a caregiver, Goodness. You help so many people here. Are they grateful? They are, Casey. Some try to be, maybe trying to be less burdensome in their gratitude, but some are not. What do you do if they say a terrible thing to you, a racist thing, or accuse you of what I don't say? Earnestly, willing the voice of her father, the Zionist pastor, I will look at them and quote the Bible and says, God created us equal. With the help of the Holy Spirit, you can see something is wrong with their situation. But with spiritual wisdom, you can help to heal it and maybe move them to not do that next time. Other times, they'll tell you things that happened in their past, things they once did to their family and others that were bad. Or you do hear them say racist things now. You see, for some, it's just in their character, so they can't change their behavior. What I'm saying is that when they get older, they can't change that or control it. So you just have to take good care. We can't overcome the past, so we must pray for better times. If you have 3 pieces of wood together, you can't just break one off with an axe. All of them are going to be chopped down. So let us stand together, and united we conquer. In sum, most of the caregivers that I spoke to gave a historical explanation first and foremost. These older white residents make racist remarks because they are from a certain generation. So their explanation in cultural context is apartheid made them do it, or they made apartheid, which made them do it. But then secondarily, they would revert to what I learned in theory at nursing school, at Zigna training, where I got my nursing certificate. And it is because of dementia-related decline or aggression. So that was more like the secondary explanation for why people may have made comments as they did. But I think we could do more ethnographic research elsewhere around the world and see what other explanations may be, even though I think most long-term care systems in the world are structured the same. They're marginalized places, erased from public memory. The direct care workforce are women of color and immigrant women. And to that effect, historically erased. Just the easy example of who died first in COVID. It was people in nursing homes. It was people in congregate care facilities that are out of sight, out of mind, just like people in prisons, another group that also majority first died of COVID.
Yeah, I mean, and you're right about, the question that stuck with me, why does white supremacy kind of reproduce itself when old white racists are dying? And I think you draw it back to questions of possession, and you're right about racism as a kind of possession that takes hold. And I was interested in that idea in relation to Angel, and especially the way, I don't want to spoil it, but especially the way Angel kind of, yes, she comes across as very doting and caring, but there's this undercurrent that's always kind of lurking in the background, and it really comes to the fore near the end. And I wanted to ask maybe why choose to depict her in that? Is that part of this kind of disidentification between, okay, there are salvageable parts of this. Yes, this person is problematic, but there are some salvageable, parts of this person. I don't know.
Yeah, I've learned from being head of department, you can't be too nice all the time to to people. And she definitely, people will step on your toes and make you cry, and then make other people cry. And yeah, being a manager is a tough position. She ran admissions, who gets into this place or not, and there are some very serious conundrums that I highlight in the book about who ends up getting into a home in the age of race-blind admissions and who does not. But someone who is trying to be a brand ambassador for this unit of the chain of homes that we're working a part of. I may be inspired by some of the characters in your book, like the mortician. There are these interesting figures we have in culture that stand at the threshold between, one iteration of life and death. And an angel is perhaps someone like that. St. Peter, saints, people who allow passage from one to the other. Clearly, doctors, people in healthcare, direct care workers are always on that line, helping to guide people to cross or to step back, knowing for themselves when to step back, like the caregiver I mentioned when they quit. And I think also, maybe not to give it away, but there are 3 staff that I interview in here, and I'll have to say none of them are working at this home anymore.
I mean, the mortician, like you say, Angel and the mortician, it would be interesting to do a comparative kind of discussion on them. But in both, we could say my novel and your book as well, there's a sense of like this house, this place is a place where either you will heal, but not in the way that you think you will heal. And you put forward this question in the chapter on security, where there's this idea of like, I think it's Goodness's mother. She goes to security at the other old age home, who's a lot less funded than Grace. And then she leaves and she says, they weren't going to make me better. And this idea of old age homes as a place where you don't just wait to, pass away, but an old age home is a place where you can heal, but not heal in the way that you might expect. I don't know, how did that come up for you?
Yeah, it was an interesting finding that different people in different vantage points voiced to me. It was an ethnographic tidbit that, yes, the white managers would sometimes complain saying, oh, Black families will come here, but then their parents don't stay here very long. And the reasons were saying, well, they just want to use the pension. And I was like, oh, is that really so? I was kind of incredulous of that. And then one of the chapters as a comparative with another old age home in the hometown of San Zima, who took that famous picture of Hector Peterson, 1976. An old age home was opened by a nurse who formerly worked at Grace, the home featured in this book. And there, the nurses and managers explained also, yes, sometimes we get ribbed by the families of our residents because they put their mother or father here, and then they say, well, why isn't my mother or father getting better? So maybe seeing the home or the space as a curative option rather than what I think is a prevailing assumption that this is the last place. This is like the last stop. And I did a book talk yesterday at UJ, and a really terrific PhD student said he did a similar study like this for his honors, where he worked interviewing hospice care workers, I believe in Alexandra, and kind of heard the same point, that family members who put their older relatives or parents who are dying in hospice saying, well, shouldn't they be getting better here for some time being, rather than seeing this as like I don't want to say a finality, but a space where healing can happen, right?
Yeah. I know, and maybe like I'm thinking of Yvonne, whose son lives in England and she has not heard from him, but she strikes up an unlikely kind of mother-daughter relationship again in an unexpected way. And I don't know if you could speak to that in terms of the old age home as this crucible where it's not inevitable that these connections will happen, but it's a possibility. And that's what's always so interesting, I think, about spaces like this as well, that's always a possibility that you might make a connection with someone that you've never, been in intimate contact with in growing up because of certain systems of segregation. And that possibility seems to, make Yvonne complicate her, because she herself has problematic views on the history of Rhodesia, from where she's from, so I don't know if you can speak to that.
Yeah, Yvonne is one of the residents featured in the book. She's missing 3 of her fingers, lost in a shot out when she worked as a kind of a soldier, fighting against those seeking liberation. And it's just a little tidbit that she strikes up a quasi mother-daughter relationship with Goodness, one of the caregivers, twice divorced. The children don't visit her, but very good storyteller. In some of the more academic writing I've done, I've tried to theorize what these kinds of relationships are that people have in a place like this. And it's something like you're participating in somebody else's life, but you don't quite know their full intention. You don't really know too much about them, but we are here by the circumstances that brought us together, a job or being needed to care for, and we do the best we can, and we should give kudos to anybody who goes through that kind of situation. And I think this is where, if I do theorize anything in this book, it's asking what grace is in your life, how you give it to yourself and how you give it to others. And I think for many of these caregivers who work with people who have very sordid pasts that literally denigrated the livelihoods of their parents and grandparents, how can you be nice to somebody like that? And maybe this trope it's very popular in like American popular culture. We have, the maid and madam story in America too. So how do people get along? And I think it's by grace, and it's saying, I accept this situation that I'm in right now, maybe temporarily, maybe for a couple weeks, because I can see that I cannot change this person. And I'm not going to waste my time trying to, because I've got too much going on in my own life. And yet I still have to behold them every day. And I think for those who end up quitting the home, that's giving grace to oneself, that I don't need to do this anymore, right? So there's that, it's couched in a very intimate language of family, but the way that I think it plays out is a bit more separated or held back. And one of the writers who helped me try to theorize this was Sisonke Msimang. She had a great lecture. It was the first of the Nelson Mandela lectures in Amsterdam in 2019, I believe. And she has this very good line from there that she says, white people will not die if they don't get the love that they think they deserve from black people. And to me, the caregivers are giving some kind of love-like thing in being friendly with people, and intimacies do forge, because I think on average, a resident in the home would live on average in the home for about 3 to 5 years before passing away. The staff average 5 to 6 years before quitting, right? So that's not an unreal or illegitimate amount of time to forge something with somebody, but no love relation is uncomplicated with your spouse, with your kids, right? So there's something love-like that people give to each other graciously, but it's also held in abeyance a little bit.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about being like held in abeyance. I think there's moments when you also question, like when in your discussions with the caregivers, whether they are saying certain things to you because of, you're a white man from America, also they have to put on a certain show for you, and you question that. And I wondered, as someone going to this home, I think for the better part of 7 years, how do you grapple with that, like your positionality coming in, white male from the US, they also have fantasies about the US and what's accessible there, and how do you navigate that and negotiate that?
I mean, I think part of it was turning to the literary, where if somebody says something to me like, oh, Casey, the EFF is really going to chase you out of here if they get into power, like, I didn't want to then quote that person and say, well, this is what they really meant to say, or this is like how it really is. Because I know them from a long period of research, but let that be, because you as a reader from South Africa might approach that differently and say, oh, well, this is an American, they're saying that, right? At the book talk yesterday, a student made a very good kind of characterization of this book. She said, and this is Clara Bratsanos, I want to qualify this, and she said, it's almost like reading this book, she's like, I felt like God looking into the waiting room at how everybody is interacting with each other. And by the end, you're led to make the final judgment as the reader. Right.
Yeah. I mean, thinking of how, like, judgment and how we, might judge ourselves in the future, or reflecting on that. You talk about how our future selves might be witches. I got that sense, or how I got the sense that reflecting on yourself as what I might be as an older person when I'm dementia-ridden. might be akin to a kind of, I want to say, a death meditation where you reflect on your own mortality and demise, and how that brings out maybe a concept like grace, a sense of interconnectedness. I just thought those two meditations are reflecting that, oh yes, one day, especially as a queer person, one day I will need a kind of, children to look after me, but I don't want children. So what is it going to look like? So all these kind of questions come up for you, and it makes you look around in your life and say, oh, wait, what is my community? How do I want to imagine the way I grow old? And I found that like reflecting on old age was such a productive thing in the now.
Yeah, again, in most of the book is much of these stories, kind of people sharing their life's lessons, and then the last chapter I'm trying to theorize a little bit, what does this mean? And, I talk about grace, and the other kind of, fancy 100 Rand word that I use to try to describe some of this is a process of disidentification or disintegration. Disintegration, just the biological fact that things will fall apart. We will be incontinent, we will lose our hair, like the waistline will go, like this is going to happen to all of us at different rates, of course, because of the horrors that are society, right? We can look at life expectancy across different groups in this country and other countries and see that not everybody will live to old age as it is for another group, right? Disintegration, that's the universal kind of fact, even though it's contextually shaped, and the disidentification too, that we claim to be who we are, but we are also a product of lots of the stereotypes that other people put onto us throughout the life course. And as a gay man growing up in the AIDS era of America, like I've lived with many slurs put on me and other ideas that people have put on me that I carry with me, right? I'm very inspired by even people like Denai who have written about, am I a woman? Am I a girl? Like, what is this, how our identities are built and come apart. And I think the aging process really highlights how certain facets of our identity can come undone as we age, but also how we might play with certain facets of our identity to our advantage. And again, I reference Sisonke Msimang, who discusses how Mandela's ANC comrades presumed he could not kind of negotiate with de Klerk while he was at Pollsmoor, assuming he was just an old man isolated in his prison cell. But Mandela kind of used that to his advantage to negotiate without the input from his ANC comrades, just like playing on that stereotype. They're like, well, I'm just no duddy. They think I don't know what I'm doing, but I really can have the subterfuge and get what I believe we all need at this point in history. So, I think we have bad ideas surrounding us, but I don't know, use it as a tool. Yeah,
because there's this like glimmer of, I don't want to call it hope, but possibility maybe at the end where you're like, oh wait, you reference a concept like geotranscendence. I think I'm pronounced geotranscendence, which is this idea that people experience space and time differently. Like you go through the disidentification and the fragmentation, and that offers a different possibility to remake ourselves. And I thought that was quite interesting. But circling back to that, you write about the circle very provocatively. I hope you can. There's a beautiful passage about the elephants. I hope you can read that because I found that stunning.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I might read a different passage.
Oh, yeah.
Is that okay? Which has to do with the circle also. Let's see here. Yeah, so the circle was a very interesting metaphor about the end of life. It inspired me to read a little bit more about that, and the quote that you're referencing comes from the writer Bongani Kona at University of Western Cape, who talks about elephants' mourning process as he reflects on having to take his mother to dialysis 5 days a week. But the circle came from an interview I did with Nolene Zyman, who was Mandela's prison nurse. And here she reflects on how she cared for her own father when he passed away. Let's see here. Well, my father, he died of liver cancer. I saw him getting yellow, thinner, getting helpless and depressed, as if he didn't feel like living anymore, and I got a caregiver for him because my mother had her grandchildren to look after. The caregiver walked him, dressed him, fed him, but I saw what a caregiver actually meant to him. He was never alone. Maybe it was an agency or travel nurse, I suspect, someone like Bethel or Goodness, with just one soul to look after on the contract. He was only 76 when he died, but same story with my mom. Her organs backed up. She didn't need care. I realized it was essential for them not to be alone and that tomorrow is another end. So I sat with my father on his bed and I said to him, "Are you ready? Is there anything you want me to do for you?" And then he said to me, "My circle is completed." I was lying with him on the bed. He closed his eyes and turned his head, and he was gone. "My God," I whisper. Peaceful, happy, realizing what was happening to him, telling me so. And up to this day, when I sit here with these people who are about to die, I say to them, "Do you feel like you've achieved everything in your life that you wanted? Is your circle completed?" And some say yes, and some say no. "I want to do this for me, this and that." That is life, she ends. Life is a circle. And precious, she says. It is precious. A blink, and it's over. After 50 years of nursing, from Robben Island to Garden City, I can still remember my first day when I walked into the ward at Oudstorn. I can still remember how those brown shoes squeezed my feet, and the starch uniform with this belt, her jangling epaulettes. It feels like yesterday. Hello? I'm calling Nolene on Facebook Messenger on her daughter Christina's account. "Casey, I quit. It was time." Gugu and Yolanda stayed late at the week's end to help her do the scrub down of the empty room. Monday came and a man moved in, not black. That was Angel's executive decision. Nolene knew it when she saw the adult daughter, leather-jacketed, curly-haired, the one who had toured early in the week. I said to her, "Do you see these hands? These hands washed that room, and now you come and put a white one in here? You are racist and are going to jail, Mama. I'll open this whole thing and show the town what's really going on." Her son encouraged her to quit. He works in HR. She says they're still friends, though. She and Angel, they see each other at Pick and Pay. What a mess, Nolene. People have problems with these things. We only just had our first black president a few years ago, and that was hard for some of them to change. They're hard asses. Darling, they must get over it.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, there are some things that people can't get over. I'm thinking of the land claim against the home, Opa Malopa. I don't know if you know any update from there since then, or, I mean, did you know going to Grace that the land claim was there, or was when you stumbled upon it, how did that kind of provoke thoughts and questions for you, and was that the impetus for this book, or what really brought all these moments together to say, oh, I want to write about this home in this way?
It wasn't the impetus for the book. I mean, field work is very serendipitous to say, "Oh, I can stay and talk to you for a while." Oh, thank you. I'm very grateful for that. And one day she just shared a stack of 3-ring binders and said, "Oh, yes, by the way, we're having this land claim, and there's a cemetery down inside the property of the old age home, and Opa Malopa wants to come and do things." And it was something I don't give too many details about in the book. I'm sure records are available for most land claims in this country. The cases was settled in different courts over a period of a few years, so it's not active anymore. But it's come to the point where the descendants of the community are able to come yearly to do rites to say hello, to honor those who remain inside the walls of this very queer place. But yeah, it wasn't the overriding motivation, but it drove the story in an interesting way, and people had some interesting reflections on it. Yeah.
Did that bring up the sense of haunting in the book? Once while reading your book, especially when there's a moment where you ask the reader, "Do you hear Fricky's words?" And it made me think of reading as a kind of invited haunting, like we read in order to be haunted, to be taken up by these different people, and to be changed in that way. So did the encounter of the graveside kind of think, oh, maybe there's this thread of haunting that I want to maybe thread through or work with?
Yeah, I don't want to. I'm being cautious that the dead shouldn't. I don't want to use the dead in like a certain way, like to advance a narrative arc, right? I think they do things to us that, they inspire us to do certain things. Not, I would rather frame it that way than saying like, oh, that was a really juicy thing that allowed me to do this. I think I was moved by the way that people in the home, especially the caregivers, understood the situation, understood its resolution, where the home's management allowed vernacular healers, Sangoma, to come into the property finally after the land claim and make do, and which helped, I think, steward how the home decided to develop the property or not. And I think in that chapter we hear Bethel say, I think they're a pretty good organization for doing that sometimes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll open up to any questions, comments, curiosities. Yeah.
Can I just give you... Sorry.
All right, I'll talk into the bunny's face. Okay, I technically have many questions, but I'll stick to one. Okay, my voice is echoing in my ears, so I'll do my best. Many white South Africans grow up essentially being raised by Black women, especially. I certainly did, my friends did, and I think especially older people did as well. And what I find quite interesting is the idea that this is essentially an inversion of that. You are a young white child being raised, being stewarded into the world by Black caregivers, and this is how these people go out as well. And I assume that sort of idea wasn't made explicit in interviews, but I'm wondering if that's something that resonates with you from the interviews you did.
Shall we take a few questions or do one by one? Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think that was a common theme that people identify generally, in that older adults tend to be infantilized, and sometimes even in the words of caregivers and the nurses, they tend to act like children later with dementia related changes or Alzheimer's. I tried to query in interviews with the caregivers, in terms of like Yvonne having goodness as like a quote unquote daughter. I say, oh, did you have a friend or someone like Yvonne like goodness in your life earlier in time? Some kind of got my train of thought, but others didn't quite get that. I think in the life course, it's definitely an inversion, but I think it's also just a continuation of kind of the unequal domestic worker relationship with a greater weight of bodily intimacy that then becomes part of the care contract. I think it makes it all the more burdensome. And it shows, I guess, something strong in one's heart, will, or other motivation to continue in that kind of work with somebody. And there's interesting literary examples of domestic workers that go on to do late life care. Craig Higginson wrote a book, I think, called The Dream House, where the domestic worker becomes the caregiver. Coetzee's Age of Iron, someone who works in the garden becomes a caregiver for this single white woman who passes from cancer. So I think there's a continuation of that unequal labor model. But the life course thing about the childhood being raised, that was common for people to talk about too.
Hi. Is that close enough? Yeah. Or too far away? Good. I'm going to just give a small quote and a little bit around it, and that'll frame the question I'm going to ask.
Sure.
Rumi, the Persian poet, was once asked what he felt about God. And at that time, Muhammad had answered that question. And another of the Iranian philosophers, Bestami, had similarly answered. And so he took those two things and he said, well, Bestami thinks, because he's had a Damascus moment in Christian terms, that he knew God and had become it. Whereas Muhammad answered, I do not know him well enough. So as you look down into the Gorgon's head of your field research and the other stuff that you've done to arrive at your book, do you see those threads coming up and tying into a knot and maybe providing some kind of template that would be an answer to something? Or do you look down and see them as each thread having some nuance that doesn't allow it to be tied? Is this a complex problem? Or is there something there that are solutions?
I had a theologian also read a draft of this book along with Jarred, who was like, I need different perspectives here to see how I can pull this off. And the theologian was quite aggravated reading the book. It's like, these people, their philosophy of the afterlife makes no sense. Like, there's nothing like systematic going on here. You can't go to heaven, but you can have your ancestors also here. Like, you can't do this. And I said, okay, well, people are beautifully frustrating and complex, and that's why I'm an anthropologist and not a theologian. And I think when I have a whole academic article where I just ask people what happens when you die, and got variable answers that were not systematic, but that reflected, I think, of the fact that I think much of South Africa is a post-mission Christian nation. I think that's like the predominant kind of flair. And so people did give kind of quips or the narrative script of, well, I will get there because Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, and we will be the same. But in the same sentence, they would also say, but I don't quite know, and like I could never be. I'm just waiting. So it's a mix. Yeah, I'm not sure if the threads, either they came together at one point and they pulled apart, where we can't see that knot anymore as it flies out into space. I think Hilton, can I push one over here to him? This is a VIP section. This person here.
Speaking to the body. Yeah, so you've written 2 books now, both of them very beautiful, and both on the time on either side, as it were, of death. And I wondered if you could say something. I don't want to ask you what drew you to that time, but you've used that time in both cases to tell us some very profound things about how we live as Southern Africans, together and apart from each other. And so, not to ask you what drew you to that particular time, but since it's such a marginal time in life, in an existential sense, what do you think it is about it that has made it so possible for you to say such profound things about how we live together and apart, and also what you think that Southern Africa has to tell to the world in that regard? Oh my goodness.
Wow. This is
Forget the second.
This is why I came to be a mentee to this mentor years ago. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to say the personal part. I mean, again, I was a gay child who was raised in the era of AIDS and saw that, death was kind of a script for who I might become. By the time I was 12, HIV/AIDS was the #1 killer of all Americans between the ages of 25 and 44 in 1996, right? So when one comes to want sex and I think, oh, sex will mean my death, that was very profound to me. I think there's a very interesting culture of death in America. It can be quite hidden and marginalized. People are quite fearful of it, which I think leads to some interesting pathological engagements with it. So my mother, for example, kept tapes on Remember answering machines, right? And she would play the tape over and over of like her own mother's voice to hear that. or saw a bird passing by the window when my grandmother died, and then started to collect birds of that form, ritualizing grief experience. Because the kind of model that we have for remembering the dead in America, besides public cemeteries, is to heroize particular dead people, to heroize those who fought in war, those who like risked their lives. It's like everywhere you go, there's a 9/11 memorial, there's a firefighters memorial, police memorial, memorials to those who have been almost militarized. 2 out of 50 states permit medical aid in dying. So you can go to a doctor, have like the long course of saying, I wish to die at this point. But that's 2 out of 50. And, you know, the ethnographic studies of this just show, you know, people calling their legislators, please, like, I want to allow myself to die. And, you know, a small town legislator saying, I'm just not quite sure about that. Like, I can't rationalize, like, why that someone would want that, you know? And so that was, I think, really part of my initial impulse to say, what does this fundamental human experience of death look like around the world? The HIV/AIDS, clearly Eswatini went through it like very, very hard, and that led me to do that initial project and kind of start to work my way back, you know, from death to aging. Maybe my last book will be about babies, I don't know.
Okay. Oh, hi Casey. Hi Jarred, and everyone. So I think I became aware of this book launch. I became aware of this book launch by chance. So, and it really intrigued me. And then when I came here, a lot of brainwaves sort of erupted in my head. And for one thing, what you mentioned, the year you mentioned, that's the year I was born, 1996, which is very significant to South Africa because that's also when the new constitution was created. So for me, then the mental exercise, then I think I've done anthropology in university as well. So we had our lecturer, Joy Owen. She's at UFS. I'm not sure if anyone knows her. So she tried to unpack what exactly is a South African. So, and especially along racial lines. And I like how in the book you actually zoned in on something so intimate that all of us experience. So regardless of what we think about it, so whether it's aging, whether it's dementia and all of those things. So for me, I saw that in the intimate spaces, we can sort of connect, even if it's at arm's length, and macroscopically, we just are separate. So macroscopically, I would say the most salient thing that's happening now, it's this little geopolitical tug of war between the political system of the US and South Africa. So to me, then it comes to you as your own identity as the author, as an American. So, and an outsider who's not South African or Southern African. So with your studies, again, to what the gentleman said, so how are we as Southern Africans? Because I think we may be biased in the way that we speak about ourselves, and especially in something as commonplace as aging, dementia, and death. Yes, I think I'll just...
So to sum what is, again, maybe a particularly South African identity vis-a-vis death, I want to make sure I'm kind of capturing what you're saying. I mean, I think there's a great veneration to it here. It's, you know, I think it's been explained in kind of anthropological terms that leave a strange taste in my mouth to try to repeat, like, the ritual did this and this, and it does effectively, but then I think alternative representation, something like Kumbula Ikai, you know, showing that death is really, making a good death is very central to keeping our social relations alive. Like, we have not done the ritual because I do not know where my brother or sister went, and the particular experience of mass dislocation and forced migration rendered that asunder. And I think maybe to go back to joking, that's one way to really deal with that. And the UJ book talk, a lot of the students were telling me about whatever the latest TikTok discourses using songs Emma Tuneni to talk, it's like about the buses and things. So I think there's a frivolity around that, and I think to pivot, because it's a big question, I'd suggest another book written by Professor Khanum over here, Riotous Deathscapes, writing about death as a Black experience from both for both Emma Ponduin and globally for Black people. I think he can maybe do that question more justice in his book than I can right now. So thank you, though. Great question.
Hi. Thanks so much for a really beautiful book. I'm looking forward to reading it. I'm originally a social worker from Ireland, and I worked as a care worker in Ireland. And I'm particularly interested in how you found that the feeling of old people being trapped. They had to go to the care home. They lost their independence, and the frustration and anger they must have felt. I'm interested in how you found their feelings about being in grace, and particularly about the poignancy of the care workers, how understanding, but also the three who decided, I've had enough. I'm not going to put up with this anymore. But I think that power dynamics is quite interesting and poignant. And I just say congratulations. I'm really looking forward to reading it. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think people had various reasons for coming to the care home. It was they lost their spouse, their adult children didn't think they felt safe. From both care workers across racial spectra, it was, well, older adults are not safe in their homes, which, I don't think that is a reason why people say that in the US too, that people are vulnerable aging in place. The kind of the awareness of the caregivers as to, why they had to make that transition, why they could not age in place. I think the caregivers, even though these were different people, different generation racially, the caregivers also sometimes received interesting life advice from the older adults who had gone through their own divorces, had gone through, my child doesn't talk to me anymore. And, the caregiver might say, my 14-year-old just is such a bitch. Like, why doesn't she talk to me? And then, Yvonne saying, that was my son. That was my stepson. He didn't never talk to me. And we're like, I went through the divorce. Like, you'll move on. So I think there was that life course experience that, I don't want to say endeared, but like made them more human or, relatable to the caregivers. Like, okay, I guess like if she can do it, maybe I can do it. Aging in place, I think, at least the studies in the US, like aging in place of one's choice, whether that is, you choose to be in an assisted living or old age home, or you choose to stay at home, when one is able to make that choice materially, it's just better in terms of psychosocial outcomes for the person, right? Yeah, Dana.
I love this. I'm so sorry. Okay, so see, now I'm gonna have to explain my jokes. So the cover. So Mika saw the cover of the book and says, "Oh, did you get that for Kulu, my dad?" Because it looked like a book of devotionals. Upon first look, and then we made a second joke, which is explain my dad. So because my dad started writing devotionals when he's 3 times a week when he's at dialysis, and also how he's processing his grief over my mother's passing has been to sort of enter the space of thinking. Well, writing devotionals, also entering a different kind of metaphysical relation to the world. And so part of that is a way to narrate a sense of what life and time is when what your sense of life sort of collapses around you, including the day-to-day routine, and then also waiting. But so when I said, no, let's look at the rest of the title, and we're like, ki, then we laughed at the title became even more like a personal, like a joke that comes from my family. But to get to your questions, to what you're framing, your aversion to theorizing, and I think I don't necessarily think through theorizing a separation of object and subject in certain ways, so I don't have the same aversion, say, per se, but I know that in terms of attention to method. So in some parts, the play, Old Testament, New Testament, kind of play of the worlds that features in your work in general, so that your positioning is not simply in terms of its metaphysics, placed in a world that's simply where the word is the word, you know, so to say. So I guess partly to hear you accent that, and then also just thinking of the method of, say, something like a devotional, because it's pedagogical function. When people think of grace, it has a pedagogical function in the world. And so as a teacher, but I'm thinking across your use of words beyond kind of the literariness or what the figurative enables you to do, that there is something in terms of a structure of decided form and of language that does allow you to not to suspend disclosure of the sense of the world and the sense of the word that you are playing with, you know?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think, you know, this is why I wanted someone like Jarred to also do a reading, people with literary expertise, because I'm, you know, jumping into something that goes beyond the methods we inherit in anthropology to play with form, to use the form of a screenplay or, you know, blank space on the page or poetic structure to make people think differently, like to conjure kind of a different episteme, you know, just a different way of thinking about what we're reading. And, you know, that does change the content in certain ways. And so preparing to write this book, you know, I really looked at, okay, what do investigative journalists do? You know, they don't necessarily want all the messy details that do come out in talking to someone for 7 years. They like need a narrative arc because that's what they believe the reader wants and expects. And so even if you read, you know, any chapter of Bethel, Andrew, Yvonne, Nolene, it's you know, framed as if taking place in a single day, but those are conversations built up from like 7 years of knowing a person. So I am in effect like erasing part of that method to do something else for the readers who are beholding this text. But it's also, you know, Netflix got our brains in a certain space. Like we like expect a resolution, right? But the way I end the book plays with that. You know, we're not quite sure if we make it out of this place alive, if, you know, we're not quite sure what is on the other side of God's waiting room or what's underneath it in terms of the cemetery at this property. So, yeah. yeah. So, I think that's what I can say. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's repeated in the way objects return. I think about the nuts. I always go back to the nuts. Yeah. How the nuts, they appear like these innocuous objects at the start, and then there's shrapnel along on the floor, and like it goes back to the way you repeat, kind of in a devotional way. It kind of makes a kind of circular kind of structure to it as well. But in the repetition, it means something different in a different context. And I think that's life, really.
Many good macadamia out in Mpumalanga. Okay, that's I played with the title "Mixed Nuts" as like an original title for this book, but people bristled quite heavily at that. So.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank
Casey,
you so much, all of you. Thank you so much
for your questions.
Thanks so much, Casey and Jarred, for a wonderful conversation, and thanks all of you for your questions and for coming. Casey, if I can just ask you to